Let me tell you about Riley Murphy, the human cadet who single-handedly rewrote the Galactic Defense Academy's understanding of what it means to underestimate someone. And trust me, this story is worth every word. Picture this: the most prestigious military academy in 3 sectors, where the galaxy's finest warriors train to become legends. Towering crystalline spires reaching toward twin suns, anti-gravity training platforms suspended over bottomless chasms, and enough advanced weaponry to level a small moon. Very impressive, very intimidating, very designed to make you feel like an insignificant speck of cosmic dust. Now picture Riley Murphy walking through all this magnificence in standard-issue boots that were 2 sizes too big, but carrying a duffel bag held together with what appeared to be ancient earth duct tape, looking about as threatening as a wet paper bag in a hurricane. Riley stood maybe 5'6" on a good day, had brown hair that refused to cooperate with military regulations, and possessed the remarkable ability to become practically invisible in any crowd. While her alien classmates boasted about their natural armor plating, enhanced musculature, or built-in plasma cannons, Riley's most notable feature was her tendency to quietly observe everything while saying absolutely nothing. Commander Qualex, a pompous Centaurian with enough medals to set off metal detectors from orbit, had made his opinion of human cadets crystal clear during orientation. Humans, he announced in his nasally condescending voice, are here due to political necessity, not military aptitude. They lack the physical prowess, the natural weapons, and frankly the killer instinct necessary for true combat excellence. The alien cadets had snickered appropriately. Riley had simply nodded and taken notes. During weapons training, while Corvan battle rhinos demolished target dummies with their horn attacks, and Savakian serpent folk wrapped around practice opponents with bone-crushing force, Riley quietly practiced with standard-issue equipment. When the instructors demonstrated advanced combat maneuvers, alien cadets eagerly volunteered to spar, showing off their species' natural advantages. Riley watched, and learned, and said nothing. The Academy's hierarchy was as rigid as a crystalline Royal Guard formation. At the top sat the elite track cadets, genetically superior specimens from warrior races who'd been bred for combat. Then came the standard track cadets, competent fighters from civilized species. At the very bottom, treated more like mascots than actual warriors, were the diversity track humans. The final combat trials were approaching, and everyone knew how this would play out. The elite track cadets would face each other in spectacular battles that would be remembered for decades. The standard track cadets would put up respectable fights before being systematically eliminated. And the humans would provide comic relief before being gently defeated in matches designed to let them save face while losing gracefully. Riley's roommate, Zara, a fellow human from the Mars colonies, had already accepted her fate. "At least we get to graduate," she said, practicing her surrender poses. "That's more than most species expected from us." Riley continued taking notes, saying nothing about the patterns she was seeing, the weaknesses she was cataloging, or the growing realization that every single instructor and elite cadet in this academy was about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions. But hey, what did a quiet little human know about combat anyway? Enter Vex Thornscale, and please, do try to contain your awe at his magnificence. 7 feet of pure draconian superiority, with scales that shifted from deep emerald to brilliant gold, depending on his mood, and currently they were shimmering with smug satisfaction. Natural armor plating that could deflect plasma bolts, retractable claws capable of shredding durasteel, and a tail that could snap bones like breadsticks. But Vex's most impressive feature wasn't physical. It was his perfect, undefeated combat record. 3 years at the Academy, 217 matches, 217 victories. The betting pools didn't even take wagers on whether Vex would win anymore. They only bet on how quickly his opponents would surrender. "Behold," Commander Qualex announced during morning formation, practically glowing with pride, "Cadet Thornscale has just broken the Academy record for consecutive victories. Truly, he represents the pinnacle of warrior evolution." Vex accepted the praise with the grace of someone who'd been accepting it his entire life. His acceptance speech lasted exactly 47 minutes and covered topics ranging from superior genetics to destiny to the natural order of galactic civilization. Riley timed it. She was good at timing things. The betting pools were legendary throughout the academy. Alien cadets wagered everything from ration credits to family heirlooms on combat matches. The odds were calculated with mathematical precision based on species advantages, individual records, and what the bookies called combat probability matrices. Humans consistently rated at the bottom of these matrices. Not just low, mind you, but in a special category the bookies had created called participation awards. The standing joke was that betting on a human to win was the same as donating money to charity. "I hear they're finally going to let the humans fight some real opponents," chuckled Grok, a Korothian cadet whose horn could punch through starship hulls. "Should be entertaining." "Define entertaining," replied Slicks, a mantoid whose reflexes operated at superhuman speeds. "Watching prey animals attempt combat techniques is more sad than amusing." Riley sat 3 tables away in the mess hall, methodically eating reconstituted protein paste and listening to every word. She had this uncanny ability to blend into the background while her hearing remained sharp enough to catch conversations across crowded rooms. Very useful trait, being forgettable. What the aliens didn't realize was that Riley had been studying them for 3 years. Not just their techniques, but their assumptions, their blind spots, their overconfidence. She knew exactly how Vex moved in combat, because she'd watched every single one of his matches. She knew his preferred attacks, his defensive patterns, and most importantly, his psychological tells. The match assignments for final combat trials were posted on a Tuesday. The crowd that gathered around the announcement board was the largest Riley had ever seen, with cadets pushing and shoving to see who they'd be facing. Excited chatter filled the air, as elite cadets found themselves matched against worthy opponents. Standard cadets accepted their challenging but fair matchups, and humans discovered they'd been given what everyone assumed were courtesy opponents. Riley's name appeared next to Vex Thornscale's. The crowd fell silent. Then someone started laughing. Then everyone was laughing. Even the instructors were chuckling at what was obviously a clerical error, or perhaps an elaborate practical joke. "Murphy versus Thornscale," wheezed Commander Quolex, wiping tears from his compound eyes. "Oh, that's rich. Someone clearly has a sense of humor in the assignment office." Riley studied the posting with the same expression she used for everything else. Calm, quiet, unremarkable. She pulled out her tablet and made a note. Just one word, finally. The betting pools exploded overnight. The odds against Riley winning were so astronomical that the Academy's quantum computers started showing error messages. Wealthy alien cadets were literally mortgaging their family estates to bet against her. Vex himself seemed almost embarrassed by the matchup. During training the next day, he approached Riley with what he probably thought was magnanimous kindness. "Murphy," he said, his scales shifting to sympathetic blue, "I want you to know there are no hard feelings about this mismatch. I'll make it quick and painless. Maybe you can even land a hit before I take you down. Really sell the entertainment value." Riley looked up at him with those unremarkable brown eyes and said, "Thanks. That's very thoughtful of you." Vex walked away feeling good about his sportsmanship. Riley watched him go and made another note in her tablet. This one said, "Overconfidence confirmed. Proceed with Plan A." What was Plan A? Well, that would have required someone to actually ask Riley what she was thinking. Nobody ever asked Riley what she was thinking. Here's the thing about Riley Murphy that absolutely nobody at the Galactic Defense Academy knew. She wasn't actually quiet because she was shy, intimidated, or lacking in confidence. She was quiet because she was busy calculating trajectory angles, analyzing weaknesses, and planning the systematic dismantling of every single assumption her classmates had made about human capabilities. Riley had grown up in old Detroit, back when Earth was still considered a backwater planet unworthy of serious galactic attention. Her neighborhood wasn't the kind of place where children learned proper etiquette and studied advanced mathematics. It was the kind of place where children learned to survive by any means necessary. And survival meant understanding that being underestimated was the greatest advantage you could possibly have. Her grandfather, a grizzled ex-military man named Tommy Murphy, had taught her 3 fundamental truths about combat. First, Never let your opponent know what you're capable of until it's too late for them to adjust. Second, every species in the galaxy had evolved specific advantages, but they'd also evolved specific blind spots. Third, humans had one advantage that no other species possessed. They were the galaxy's ultimate underdogs, which meant everyone consistently underestimated them. Riles, Tommy used to say while teaching her everything from boxing to military strategy to psychological warfare. Being small and quiet ain't a weakness if you use it right. Let him think you're harmless right up until the moment you drop him. Riley had spent her childhood learning Krav Maga from Israeli instructors, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from former UFC champions, and something called combat sambo from Russians, who claimed it didn't officially exist. She could field strip weapons blindfolded, calculate ballistic trajectories in her head, and read micro-expressions well enough to predict attacks before her opponents had consciously decided to make them. But none of this appeared in her academy records. Officially, Riley Murphy was just another diversity admission from Earth who'd scored adequately on written exams and barely passed the minimum physical requirements. The academy was buzzing with pre-match excitement. Everywhere Riley went, she overheard conversations about the upcoming spectacle. Alien cadets were placing bets not on who would win, but on whether Riley would last 10 seconds or surrender immediately. Some were even wagering on whether she'd faint from fear before the match began. I heard Thornscale's planning to carry her around the ring before gently setting her down, giggled Mira, a celestial whose species was known for their advanced empathy. He wants to make it look like a real fight for the cameras. That's actually quite considerate, replied Nix, whose mantis-like features clicked with approval. Humans have such fragile egos. Better to let her maintain some dignity. Riley walked past their table in the mess hall, invisible as always, mentally adding their observations to her growing database of alien psychology. She'd learned that most species projected their own values and limitations onto others. Celestials assumed everyone shared their need for emotional validation. Antoids believed everyone operated on pure logic. Draconians thought everyone was motivated by dominance hierarchies. None of them understood humans at all. That evening, while her classmates attended pre-match parties and strategy sessions, Riley went through her preparation routine. She started with meditation, clearing her mind of distractions and focusing on the task ahead. Then came physical warm-ups, loosening muscles and testing reflexes. Finally, she reviewed her tactical analysis of Vex Thornscale. She knew he was right-handed and favored his claws over his tail in close combat. She knew he had a habit of telegraphing his power attacks by shifting his weight to his back foot. She knew his scales provided excellent protection against energy weapons but were vulnerable to precise strikes at joint locations. Most importantly, she knew he'd never faced an opponent who understood the difference between seeming weak and being weak. Riley's tablet contained detailed notes on every single elite cadet in the academy. Combat styles, psychological profiles, physical weaknesses, strategic blind spots. 3 years of patient observation had given her a tactical advantage that no amount of natural armor or enhanced strength could overcome. Zara found her reviewing the data. "Still can't believe they matched you against Thornscale," she said, flopping down on her bunk. "Everyone's saying it's either a mistake or some kind of hazing ritual for the elites." Riley looked up from her tablet. "What do you think it is?" "Honestly, I think someone in the assignment office has a sick sense of humor." Zara paused. "Riley, you know you don't have to go through with this, right? Medical withdrawal is still an option." Riley smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes that would have made Vex Thornscale very, very nervous if he'd been there to see it. "Thanks," she said, "but I think I'll stick around for the show." Across the academy, Vex was holding court in the elite quarters, regaling his admirers with predictions about tomorrow's match. The betting pools had reached record levels. Commander Quillex was already planning his post-match speech about the natural order of galactic civilization. Everyone was so excited about the foregone conclusion that nobody noticed Riley Murphy timing her practice movements with a stopwatch. 3.3 seconds, she noted in her tablet. More than enough time. The Grand Combat Arena was packed beyond capacity. And let me tell you, Nothing quite says galactic spectacle like 10,000 aliens gathered to watch what they assumed would be the most lopsided fight in Academy history. The arena itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive crystalline dome with variable gravity, environmental controls, and enough sensor equipment to analyze a gnat's fighting style. Commander Kronx stood at the announcer's podium, practically vibrating with excitement. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary entities of all species. His voice boomed through the arena's acoustic system. Prepare yourselves for a matchup that will be remembered for generations. In the blue corner, representing the pinnacle of draconian warrior evolution, undefeated in 217 consecutive battles, I present Cadet Vex Thornscale. The crowd erupted. Vex emerged from his preparation chamber in full ceremonial armor, scales gleaming like liquid gold under the arena lights. He moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator, acknowledging the cheers with imperial waves. His entrance took exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, because naturally everything about Vex was designed for maximum dramatic impact. And in the red corner, Kronx continued, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was respectful solemnity, representing the courage and determination of humanity despite overwhelming odds, I present Cadet Riley Murphy. The applause was polite, sympathetic, the kind reserved for particularly brave individuals about to attempt something impossibly stupid. Riley walked out of her chamber wearing standard combat gear, no ceremony, no fanfare, looking exactly like what everyone expected. A small human who was about to become a cautionary tale about reaching beyond your capabilities. The betting pools had closed an hour earlier when the odds against Riley became so extreme that the Academy's computers started displaying mathematical impossibility warnings. Alien cadets had wagered fortunes on the assumption that this would be less a fight than a demonstration of species hierarchy. Vex approached the center of the arena with the swagger of someone who'd never lost anything in his entire life. Riley walked to her mark with the same unremarkable calm she brought to everything else. The contrast was almost comical, 7 feet of armored magnificence facing 5'6" of apparent mediocrity. Cadet Murphy, Vex said, his voice carrying easily across the arena thanks to his species' natural acoustics. I want the audience to know that I bear you no ill will. You've shown great courage simply by stepping into this arena. Riley nodded politely. Thanks, that means a lot. The match referee, a crystalline whose species was known for their precision and impartiality, began the standard pre-combat protocols. This is an elimination match under Academy Regulation 7-7 Alpha. Victory is achieved through opponent surrender, incapacitation, or referee stoppage. Medical teams are standing by. Combatants acknowledge ready status. Vex settled into his traditional draconian fighting stance, claws extended, tail coiled for striking, scales shifting to aggressive crimson. Every line of his body screamed lethal competence. Riley stood there. Just stood there, hands at her sides, weight evenly distributed, breathing steady. To the alien audience, she looked like someone who'd already accepted defeat. To anyone who actually understood human body language, she looked like a coiled spring waiting for exactly the right moment to release 3 years of stored potential energy. Combatants ready? The referee raised his crystalline arm. We begin. Here's where things get interesting. Vex launched himself forward with the explosive power that had made him legendary. A textbook draconian charge, designed to overwhelm opponents with speed and strength before they could react. His claws gleamed as they swept toward Riley in an arc that should have ended the fight in seconds. Riley moved. Not dramatically. Not with flashy acrobatics or impossible superhuman feats. She simply stepped sideways, ducked under Vex's swing, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to guide him into a trajectory that sent him crashing face first into the arena floor, with enough force to crack the reinforced surface. The entire sequence took exactly 3.3 seconds. The arena fell silent. Not the dramatic pause for effect silence you get in Holovids, but the genuine stunned silence of 10,000 beings trying to process something their brains insisted couldn't have happened. Vex lay motionless on the arena floor, his golden scales now decorated with crystalline dust and his pride scattered in pieces around him. Riley stood over him, completely composed, not even breathing hard. The silence stretched on and on. Medical teams started moving toward the arena floor, not because anyone had called them, but because someone needed to do something, and medical intervention seemed like the only response that made sense. Riley looked up at Commander Kronx, who was staring at her with his compound eyes wide enough to reflect the arena lights like disco balls. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the absolute quiet, "should I wait for him to get back up? Or are we calling this one?" That's when the chaos began. The aftermath of Riley Murphy's 3.3-second victory looked like someone had thrown a quantum grenade into the Academy's entire understanding of reality. Picture 10,000 alien beings suddenly discovering that their fundamental assumptions about the universe might be slightly off target, and you'll have some idea of the pandemonium that erupted. Commander Kronx stood at his podium, opening and closing his mouth like a particularly confused fish, while his aide frantically checked the arena's sensor readings for signs of equipment malfunction. The medical teams had reached Vex, who was conscious but apparently unable to process how he'd gone from unstoppable force to floor decoration in less time than it took to blink. "Replay," someone shouted from the stands. "We demand a replay of the match footage." The arena's holographic display system obliged, projecting the fight in slow motion for everyone to analyze. And there it was, captured in perfect detail: Riley's impossibly efficient movement, her precise timing, her use of Vex's own momentum against him. What had looked like luck to the naked eye revealed itself to be pure technique when examined frame by frame. "Impossible," muttered Professor Klex, the Academy's chief combat instructor, whose 6 eyes were focused on different aspects of the replay simultaneously. "Humans don't possess the reflexes necessary for that level of precision timing." Riley overheard this and decided it was time for some education. She walked over to where the instructors were huddled around their analysis tablets, her calm demeanor unchanged despite having just accomplished the impossible. "Excuse me, Professor," she said politely. "I think there might be some confusion about human capabilities." The instructors turned to stare at her like she was some kind of alien artifact that had started speaking, which, from their perspective, wasn't far from accurate. "You see," Riley continued, "what I just used is called a hip toss. It's a basic technique in several human martial arts, including judo and aikido. The principle is to use your opponent's forward momentum against them by redirecting their center of gravity. Physics, basically." Professor Klex's translator implant started making distressed beeping sounds. "Physics. Sure. Vex weighs about 300 pounds and was moving at approximately 15 feet per second when he charged. That's roughly 4,500 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. I just redirected it downward instead of letting it hit me. Conservation of momentum plus leverage equals 1 unconscious draconian." The silence that followed this explanation was different from the stunned quiet after the fight. This was the silence of minds being blown. Dr. Helix, the Academy's xenobiology expert, stepped forward with his scanner already active. "Cadet Murphy, our records indicate that humans lack the enhanced reflexes necessary for combat at elite levels." Riley shrugged. "That's because your records assume enhanced reflexes are necessary. Humans compensate for slower reflexes with pattern recognition, tactical analysis, and technique refinement. We call it training." "Training?" Commander Kronx had finally found his voice, though it came out several octaves higher than usual. "Yes, sir. I've been studying everyone's fighting styles for 3 years. Turns out when you watch someone fight 217 times, you start to notice patterns. Vex always drops his shoulder before a power attack, always leads with his right claw, and always assumes his opponent will try to block instead of redirect. Once you know the pattern, timing the counter move becomes relatively simple." Across the arena, alien cadets were having rapid conversations in dozens of different languages, but the theme was universal: sudden dawning terror. If Riley had been studying everyone for 3 years, what did that mean for their upcoming matches against other humans? The betting pools had collapsed so completely that the Academy's financial computers had shut down to prevent systemic economic damage. Fortunes had been lost in 3.3 seconds, and the bookies were nowhere to be found. Cadet Thix, a Korothian who'd been scheduled to fight Riley's roommate Zara, approached with visible nervousness. "Murphy," he said, his usual bluster replaced by cautious respect, "exactly how many humans at this academy have been studying our fighting patterns?" Riley considered this question with the same thoughtful expression she used for everything else. "Well, there are 47 humans in our class, and we do tend to share information with each other. So I'd say probably all of us?" The sound that came from the alien cadets couldn't quite be called screaming. It was more like the collective realization of an entire species that they might have seriously misjudged another species. Multiple times. For 3 years running. Medical teams had finally gotten Vex to his feet, though he moved like someone whose entire worldview had been physically knocked out of him along with his consciousness. He approached Riley with the careful respect usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. "Murphy," he said, his scales having shifted to a color that his species used to indicate profound humility, "I appear to have underestimated you." Riley nodded. "That's okay. Everyone does." And that, right there, was the moment when the Galactic Defense Academy's elite cadets realized they weren't elite anymore. They were prey. 3 months later, the Galactic Defense Academy had undergone what historians would later call the Great Recalibration. This was a fancy way of saying that everyone had finally figured out that underestimating humans was roughly equivalent to sticking your head into a black hole and hoping for the best. The changes were dramatic and immediate. Human combat techniques were now part of the mandatory curriculum. The library's martial arts section, which had previously consisted of one dusty digital file labeled Primitive Earth Fighting Methods, now occupied an entire wing and required advanced clearance to access. 3 alien species had formally requested cultural exchange programs to study human tactical thinking. Riley Murphy had become something of a legend, though she handled fame with the same understated grace she brought to everything else. When junior cadets approached her for autographs, she politely redirected them to the training facilities. When Hollywood producers offered her lucrative contracts, she suggested they talk to her after graduation. The betting pools had been restructured completely. Humans were no longer in the participation awards category. They weren't even in the regular categories. They'd been moved to a special designation that the bookies called insufficient data for accurate odds calculation, which was mathematics speak for we have absolutely no idea what these people are capable of. Commander Quolex had requested a transfer to a nice, quiet posting monitoring asteroid mining operations. His replacement, Commander Torres, was a human veteran who'd spent 30 years convincing alien species that Earth's military wasn't to be taken lightly. Her first official act was to establish new academy policies based on the radical concept that all species might have something valuable to contribute to galactic defense. Riley sat in the mess hall, eating the same reconstituted protein paste she'd always eaten, listening to conversations that had changed dramatically over the past few months. "I heard that human Zara took down 3 mantoids simultaneously using something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu," whispered Nix, whose species had previously considered themselves the ultimate close combat specialists. "That's nothing," replied Grok, whose horn-based attacks had been neutralized by a human cadet using basic leverage principles. "Tommy Chen defeated an entire squad of Corvin elites by making them defeat themselves. Called it psychological warfare." Riley smiled slightly and made a note in her tablet. Not about combat techniques this time, but about how quickly beings could adapt their thinking when presented with new information. It was actually quite encouraging. Vex Thornscale approached her table with the careful respect he now showed all humans. His recovery from their match had been complete, though his ego might never fully heal. "Murphy," he said, "I wanted to thank you." Ry looked up from her meal. "Thank me? Before our match, I thought I was unbeatable. That kind of overconfidence would have gotten me killed in actual combat. You taught me that there's always someone better. Always something new to learn. That's a valuable lesson." Riley nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Vex, you're still one of the best fighters in this academy. You just needed to learn that being good at fighting isn't the same thing as being good at war." "What's the difference?" "Fighting is about strength and speed and technique. War is about understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. Riley gestured around the mess hall, where alien cadets were frantically studying human tactical manuals and trying to learn concepts like asymmetric warfare and force multiplication. Right now, you're all trying to figure out how humans fight. That's fighting thinking. And war thinking? Riley's smile widened just slightly, and for a moment Vex caught a glimpse of the tactical mind that had been quietly analyzing the entire academy for 3 years. War thinking, she said, is realizing that humans have been studying how everyone else fights for the past 50 years, ever since we joined the galactic community. We've been preparing for conflicts with species we'd never met, using weapons we'd never seen, in environments we'd never experienced. When you've spent that much time planning for the unknown, fighting the known becomes relatively straightforward. Vex's scales shifted through several colors as he processed this information. You mean this whole time humans have been preparing for war with the galaxy? Not war with the galaxy, Riley corrected. War alongside the galaxy. Against threats we haven't encountered yet. The thing about being the underdogs is that you never assume the current situation is going to last forever. She stood up, collecting her tray with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything else. Besides, she added, heading toward the dish recycler, someone has to be ready when the real bad guys show up. And trust me, compared to what's probably out there in the dark between stars, our little academy squabbles are just practice. Vex watched her walk away, and for the first time since joining the academy, he felt genuinely grateful that humans were on the same side as the rest of galactic civilization. After all, if Riley Murphy was what humans considered quiet and unremarkable, he really didn't want to meet the ones they considered dangerous. In her dormitory that evening, Riley updated her personal log with a single entry, mission accomplished. Academy relationships recalibrated, human tactical capabilities properly assessed, ready for Phase 2. What was Phase 2? Well, that would require someone to actually ask Riley what she was thinking. And now, finally, someone probably would.